And this is somewhere between the 170th and 180th webinar that we've hosted in the past 3.5 years. So clearly there's been a need in the region, an interest in the region for these kinds of events. So we hope you'll still continue to come to our conferences, but still the webinars have served a real need. And this morning we're enjoying a record-breaking registration with Kim has something almost 180 people who have signed up. We'll see how many people decide Saturday morning they want to get out of bed, but it was an incredible sign-up opportunity. And we're just delighted that she's able to join us today and share her knowledge and expertise about this really important topic. It's clearly something that's developing as a major initiative across the schools in the region. And we're very happy that we can support it in this way and look forward to other opportunities to doing so. Just as a side note, Kim's presentation does have 4 points where she's going to stop. So if you have a question that there's also going to be Q&A at the end of the presentation, but if you have a pressing question at one of those points, you're certainly welcome to put them into the chat. And Micah Cruz, who I'd like to introduce to you, has just joined our office a couple of months ago, and she's handling our webinars and serving as the host this morning. So thank you all for joining us, and we're really looking forward to a great way to start the weekend today. So Kim, it's all yours, and thank you on behalf of all of us at IRCOS again. Thank you so much for giving some time for this.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here with you all. I can't wait to chat coaching with you. I'm so excited about this record-breaking numbers because I've been talking about coaching for years, and I'm so glad that schools in the region are interested in digging deeper into this. If you have a moment as we're getting started, please feel free to drop a little emoji in the chat to let us know where you're at in terms of coaching. If you've had some positive experiences, you can drop a heart. If you're curious and you're just learning, you can drop those little eyes. If you've had some negative experiences, give us a red flag so we can address some of those as we go through the session. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you all of the experience that I have accumulated in my own experience being a coach here in the IRCOS region, probably for 10 years and 5 years outside of that in Europe, as well as the last 5 years of interviews on the Coach Better podcast that I host that comes out weekly. So if you're curious about coaching and you want to learn more about coaching, that podcast comes out every Wednesday, featuring inspirational educators and school leaders in international schools focused on instructional coaching, as well as stories from my clients in the Coach Certificate and Mentorship Program. So real coaches in international schools around the world. I'll be sharing some stories from them as well. And then some highlights from some selected research and resources that I think are really relevant to our conversation today. And you can see I've got 2 books on the screen there. And one of them is the book I was referencing before the call started, Coaching Matters by Jo Ellen Killian. That book is gold. This session is called Cultivating Belonging Through Coaching. And this one quote from Caitlin Patanga, who's the middle school assistant principal at the International School of Panama, on our Coach Better podcast that will be released in October of this year, just sums up exactly what I think coaching can do in a school. She says, our coach is critical for culture building and teacher professional learning. It's a safe space for teacher growth because they're non-evaluative. And the impact of coaching is a sense of belonging. And that's what we want. We want coaching that creates that sense of belonging, community, growth-mindedness, energizing professional learning on a daily basis with someone who's there in the school with them to support them. And that's what we're going to talk about creating today. Just as a quick refresher for anyone who is completely new to coaching, maybe you're not familiar with the phrase or you have a previous kind of thought, but you're not really sure. This is my personal definition of instructional coaching. You can find lots of definitions online. They're all very similar, but I'll just run you through mine so we have that background as we get started. Instructional coaching is a formal or informal process that is non-evaluative and non-tied to appraisal. That's a huge key, non-evaluative and not tied to appraisal. It's focused on teacher goals as determined in partnership by the teacher. It is invitational for teachers to access and involves a cycle, structure, or system of self-reflection. And, come on, slide. Operates as close to the classroom as possible with observations, co-teaching, or modeling as a central part of the experience. So that's instructional coaching. It's a informal or formal, non-evaluative process focused on teacher goals and teacher professional growth that follows a cycle and happens as close as possible to the classroom. There's many models of coaching, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's kind of a general broad definition. I've got a graphic of the coaching cycle that is not showing on my screen. Maybe it's showing on yours. There it is. Just general overview of what a coaching cycle could look like. And this is already I'm at one of my first stopping points. So if you have a moment to think about, you can either just straight up ask me a question, or if you want a prompt, if you have experienced coaching in the past, what were 2 stars and a wish about that program? 2 things that were really great and a wish that you wish could happen. So, or you might just have a general question. And Micah, I'll ask you to give me I'm looking at the chat, but if you have some that you are seeing, and I think I just saw a hand.
Yes. Now it's disappeared. Who was that?
I'm just looking through the chat to see. Anyone have any questions to start with? Thanks for popping in. I see lots of experience with coaching. This is awesome. And a lot of curiosity about coaching. I see no red flags. That makes me very happy. I'll have another stopping point soon. So if there's no questions now, I'll just keep going. And maybe in your mind, as you're going through this session, think about whether it's your previous experience with coaching or a future experience with coaching. What do you really want to have happen? What's your wish for your coaching program? Because I think when you define that and you have a clear understanding of what that is, it's a lot easier to make it happen. I'm going to break this session down into 3 parts. If you've ever seen me present before, you know that I kind of do all my presentations in this way. The first part will be a little bit about why coaching. The second part will be about how to grow a thriving coaching culture. And the third part will be about pitfalls to avoid, things to watch out for. And these are all experiences that I have either experienced personally myself, or that my clients have experienced, or that I've heard about through my Coach Better podcast. So everything that I'm sharing here is based on real world examples in international schools, kind of at a global scale. Why coaching? The first, foremost, easiest reason is that it is one of the pathways to improve student learning. That's why we're all here. We're here to improve student learning. I have recently written a chapter for a handbook on research in international schools that kind of pulls together the research on instructional coaching and then talks about how it's implemented well in international schools. I'm not sure when that chapter is going to be published. I'm hoping, December-ish, the book will come out. But if you get on my mailing list, you'll hear all the updates about that chapter. And these are just a couple of highlights from that research that if you wanted to grab a screenshot, just some reference quotes about the impact that coaching can have on student learning. Probably if you're in this session, you know that that's already the case. That's why we hire coaches. That's why we have coaches in schools. We want to improve student learning, but it can do so much more. And so I feel like there's a hidden value of instructional coaching, and that's that bringing that sense of belonging. Carla Marshall, who will be featured on the podcast for the second time this November, director at Dresden International School, talks about coaching creating humanizing spaces for all stakeholders, because listening is an act of compassion that provides space for the other individual. If we want to create efficient and humanizing organizations, coaching is a way to do that. And this is another kind of essence of what we can bring through coaching when we're really focusing on teacher professional growth. My slides are going nice and slow. Let's see. So the power of coaching to create this sense of belonging is consistent and ongoing growth opportunities that are personalized and customized to the individual. So that's really important. Customized not only to the individual person, but also to your school community. It's not an outside consultant delivering a package. It's something that meets the needs of the people in your community right now. Coaching happens as close to the classroom as you can get, because during that cycle, we're in classrooms with teachers, working together with them, with their actual students. And we know professional development is most effective when it's as close to the classroom as possible. And that's what coaching does for you. When coaches work successfully with one teacher on a team or department, it can create a ripple effect. When teachers can see that something is working in one classroom, they recognize the potential for that to work in their classroom. So the momentum you build with one person can extend well beyond just one classroom, one subject area, one division even. Something I think is really unique about coaching that can bring a real value to your school is that they have a unique perspective. They can see the micro, the day-to-day, what's happening at the classroom level, and because they're often part of bigger picture professional development or leadership planning conversations, they also have the macro big picture view. They're one of the very few people on the school campus that have both the micro and the macro and no evaluative role. So that's a huge advantage for teachers and for school leaders. When coaches are full-time employed in your school and they're part of the school community, they know what's going on in the school community. They're part of the culture of the school. They know how the school operates. They know the members of the staff. They know what it's like to be an employee there. And that's really important and very different from bringing an outside person in to consult on a specific topic. When they're part of the school community, they change and grow with the school. We know our schools are complex systems and they're always changing over time. When coaches are part of that community, they grow with the school, so they know what the school needs right now, not last year or next month. Coaching, because it's driven by teacher professional goals, promotes a sense of growth mindset. It promotes this opportunity for risk-taking and learning because you have a safe support structure in place, that coach who's working with you to better understand how we can reach our goals. I had a Coach Better conversation with Nikki Dinsdale, who at the time was at United World College in Southeast Asia. And she talked about coaching being like an intellectual spa. And I love that visual of like just that time to think and process and reflect on your work so you can grow as a professional. When we're hiring really engaged, passionate, exceptional professionals, they want to be fulfilled. And coaching gives them an opportunity to really think deeply about their practice. We hear this all the time, but when we talk about the focus of our school is learning, and therefore coaching is for everyone, for students, for teachers, and for leaders. When you invest that time, energy, and money in hiring a coach, you're demonstrating how much you value teachers and their professional growth. You're putting your mouth where, you're putting your, what is it? Your mouth where, you're putting action to the words that you say. I can't think of the right phrase right now, but it really is an investment in teachers and their professional growth. So when you put all those pieces together, you're creating a safe environment for teachers to grow that is non-evaluative and not tied to appraisal. You're valuing teachers' professional growth at the personalized level, at the individual level. You're creating space and time for teachers to reflect deeply, which leads to teacher fulfillment and improved student learning and creates that culture of belonging that we're looking for when we're bringing in a coaching program. I recently wrote an article for The Learning Professional, which is Learning Forward's monthly magazine. And the title of the article is When We Invest in Coaching, We Invest in Teachers. And I think that is the essence of this session today. We know that teachers are the ones who are going to have the impact on student learning. So when we're investing in those teachers, that's what coaching can do to help us improve student learning. Just have a little graphic here for you to take a look at. These are 8 factors that support or hinder the growth of a coaching culture. And you can see the top is all of the things that support the growth of a coaching culture. And underneath are kind of the inverse, what might hinder the growth of a coaching culture. So we're looking at trying to prioritize, focus on a growth mindset culture, a shared vision of coaching, visible leadership buy-in, alignment of expectations from the teachers to the leaders to the colleagues in the school, when it's non-evaluative and confidential, when there are logistics that support coaching, like time for coaching conversations, when there's consistent communication, implementation, and sharing of coaching practice, and when the impact of coaching is measured and evaluated. This is from the chapter in the book that I wrote. So if you're curious about that, that will be coming out hopefully December, January this time. Another quote for you from Liz Cho, who at the time of recording this podcast episode was principal of teaching and learning at Korea International School. And she says, if we really value teaching and learning and the research that goes along with learning sciences, it's tough work for one person to do. So in order for teachers to be practitioners that reflect on their practice, a coaching program is essential. We need school leaders in schools who recognize the value of investing in coaching to help build teacher practice, teacher competency. And we're not talking about from a deficit model, we're talking about from an assets-based model. It's not to fix teachers, it's to help them excel help them grow in the area where they want to grow. This is another one of my stopping points, so I'll give you a minute to have a think. If you need a prompt, the question I'm wondering about is, when you think about your school, what do you need? What need would coaching fulfill? But if you just have a question, please drop it in the chat and Micah will let me know. I'm going to open the chat as well.
Hi, Kim. We have a question already from Anuja.
Awesome. Perfect.
I am kind of confused as to how different schools integrate the role of an instructional coach. What does it look like in real time?
I'm not entirely sure what you mean, but I'm going to answer and then you can put, thank you, put your money where your mouth is. Thank you. I'm going to answer in what I think you mean and then correct me if I'm getting it right. So many schools will hire a full-time person or more who is an instructional coach. That person will not have a teaching load. Their job will be to support teachers in developing their professional growth and improving student learning in the classroom. Is that what you're asking, or is there something else that I missed? And I see a bunch of other questions, so I'm happy to answer those too.
That answers my question adequately well. Thank you.
Perfect. No worries.
Okay, second question, Kim, from Amanda.
Yes.
In a small school, is it viable for a school admin to also be the instructional coach?
Excellent question. This is probably the #1 question I get from administrators right now. It is absolutely possible for administrators to have coaching conversations, but I would really shy away from labeling an administrator as a coach, because there's a really key part of coaching to make it successful, and that is that it's non-evaluative. And so when you put, both hats on the same person, it becomes really challenging, not just for the coaching partner to be able to have a truly vulnerable conversation with the person who ultimately decides whether they have a contract or not, but also for the school leader to be having that conversation. And if something comes up that they need to deal with, they can't just let it go because they've got coach mode on. So that kind of takes away that coaching element. Doesn't mean school leaders can't have coaching conversations. They absolutely can, and they absolutely should. But if you really have the opportunity to have it be a non-evaluative person who really has no conflict of interest there, that's going to lead you towards success a lot faster than kind of putting those two together. And I'm going to talk more about that a little bit later as well.
Okay, thanks, Kim. We have two more. First,
Yep.
From Brian. What are the strengths and weaknesses of a coaching model when compared to a professional growth program? Example, Danielson or strong model led by an administrator.
So I think that kind of comes back to a little bit what I just answered, but there's two big things to consider. One is any sort of professional growth program, no matter what you title it, no matter what you say about it, ultimately it's evaluating the teacher. So that's the difference between any sort of appraisal process and coaching, is there's no evaluation involved. That provides a safe space for a teacher to take risks and fail and grow. Doesn't mean that leaders can't have coaching conversations. They absolutely can. But the more you can make the distinction between what is appraisal and what is a formal professional growth program and what is coaching, the more likely you are to have success with coaching and teachers willing to invest and take risks and really try new things.
Okay, another question from Dave. Thanks, Kim. Could an instructional coach have a small teaching load to model best practices?
Yes, I have often had teaching loads when I've been a coach in schools, and maybe some coaches will not like this answer, but I actually really loved it. I loved it because I was on the same schedule as the teacher. I knew when reporting was, I knew when parent-teacher conferences were. I was kind of in the thick of it. And when I had like an advisory group or tutor group or homeroom, whatever, depending on what you call it, that really helped me know the kids really well. So I personally really liked that, especially if it's in a small school when you don't have the capacity to have a full-time person. That really makes them part of the school community. I don't know if you want to have them be seen as like the expert, because that also kind of takes a little bit away from the value of coaching being like growth for the teacher. We don't necessarily want to have like expert classrooms, but they certainly could be living the practice that they preach, a little bit like put your money where your mouth is. They're walking the talk.
Okay, we have one more from Laura.
Sure.
I am wondering about the invitational aspect. What happens when we have a position for instructional coaching, but not many teachers are taking advantage of that? Even if initial meeting with the instructional coach is required by admin for new teachers, is there any way to create more buy-in besides just waiting for the benefits to spread by word of mouth?
That is a perfect question. Yes. Okay. So there's a lot of things going on in that one question. And this is, I think, where coaching can struggle or flounder, is starting a program for the very first time. First of all, it's going to take time for the program to build. So that I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But also, anytime you have required coaching meetings, it's like already putting a resistance in there, right? So trying to allow this to be a little bit more organic and invitational rather than having required coaching meetings will help teachers opt in. Another thing is those 8 habits I just mentioned. Let me see if I can go back there without this one. If your school has a growth mindset culture, it has a really shared vision of coaching, which includes a definition of what coaching is and clear understanding of what the roles and terms mean, visible leadership buy-in, alignment of expectations, all of those pieces are going to go a long way to having teachers choose to opt in. So if you brought in a coaching program without some of that work, that would be where I recommend you start. And that's actually what I'm going to talk about next, which is like the 3 elements of a successful coaching program, which is the Thrive model, which is my whole next section. So if that's okay, that's like a perfect segue for me to move on to that. And I'm sure there were other questions in there. Mika, maybe if you could save them till we get to the next stopping point.
Okay, sure.
Awesome. Okay, so I would like to tell you a little bit about how to create a thriving coaching culture. And some of it might mean that you're in the middle of having a coaching program right now and you're like, oh no, we need to rethink this. That is totally okay. This is not a do it one time and you're done and you never have to do it again. This is a not do it once and forget about it. This is something that is a constant iteration. So don't feel stressed if you see this and you think, oh, we didn't do that. So the 3 elements of the Thrive model are clarity, consistency, and community. And when you have all 3 of those, you're working towards creating the foundations of a thriving coaching culture. This model is based on all of my work with coaches and school leaders over the last 10 years, my own personal experience as a coach in international schools for 15 years, all the research that I've done, and the work with my clients over the last 10 years. So all of this is kind of bringing together all of that work for you. The 3 phases kind of break down like this, and I'm going to go through each one of them, so don't feel any stress, but if you want, you can certainly take a screenshot of this screen. When we're talking about that clarity phase, that phase 1, we're talking about having a clear definition, having defined terms and roles, having identified a framework and structure, having a coaching champion at the leadership level, and then getting alignment with what all of the leadership believe is coaching, as well as the coach, as well as the teachers. In phase 2, we're thinking about consistency. We're thinking about the importance of building personal relationships, getting a deeper understanding of what teachers' needs, being able to communicate consistently what the role of the coach is, personalize, but also have consistent structures to your coaching actions. And all of that will lead to deeper conversations. And then in phase 3, in community, we're looking at taking all of what we did in phase 1 and phase 2 and building that up. So scaling it so that more teachers are being coached, connecting teachers to each other. So we're getting to teams and groups and being more embedded in the school culture, looking at measuring, coaching, sharing the success, and then creating that sense of belonging. So coaching culture requires clarity, consistency, and community, clarity in vision, purpose, expectations, and communications. When we're thinking about that, we're thinking about the vision. What do we want coaching to do? What is our purpose behind coaching? That is obviously going to need to be connected to the school vision. And it needs to have clear success indicators so we know when we're moving on the right path, when we're getting there, when we're reaching our goals. One really important element of that is clear and visible definitions of terms and roles. So what is the definition of coaching? What is the role of the coach? Who is the role of the coach? When do we use coaching? Really being clear about all of those things. It's such a generic word. We are so familiar with the word coaching. It's in sports. It's in so many different areas. So in schools, we really need to define what that means so we can be sure we're all on the same page and we're not talking about coaching, but we're just like missing each other. Having some kind of framework and structure for your coaching model, it can be as simple as what I showed you earlier, or you can dig into actual coaching models like student-centered coaching from Diane Sweeney or the impact cycle from Jim Knight, but actually having a model, a framework that you follow is really helpful. I mentioned this piece about a coaching champion. Having a school leader who really advocates for coaching will help keep the conversation about coaching at that top level so that you keep continuing to push forward And, as we all know, working in schools, when we lose students for whatever reason and budgets become tight, any non-teaching position is always the first to get cut. So coaching can be on that chopping block much more frequently than any other position. So you need someone on the leadership team who really understands the value of coaching, who can continue to advocate for that position. And because of that, coaches need a support structure in place. They need to know who they can go to. There needs to be clear lines of communication so that we are supporting the coaches once we have them on site. And that also includes a leadership alignment, a consistent understanding of what coaching is, what coaches do, what work needs to be assigned to coaches between coaches and their leaders, and then among all of the leaders in the school. This is Joellen Killian, the author of the book that I recommended earlier. If I can describe it with specificity, it is far more likely to be achieved than if I don't have the capacity to be specific. So all of this about clarity is about being specific. If we can be specific about what the role is, what that person is doing, then we can also measure it. So she's talking about taking time to define the what is coaching, not just assuming we all understand what coaching is. Case study for you. This is Amy. She worked with me in the coach. And when she started the coach, she was working at a brand new school, highly demanding environment here in Asia. They were building coaching team with multiple coaches, math, science, literacy, tech. And the clarity part of the program helped her and her team really define what is coaching, what do we want coaching to be here. So even though there were multiple disciplines, all coaching in the same school setting, large school, they could have some level of clarity around their role. That's huge. On this quote, she says her coaching team made great strides already just in that short period that she was working with me, because they are becoming more consistent in their work. Second stage of this Thrive model, which is not like 1, 2, 3, but the second thing I'm talking about today is consistency. We're looking at consistency in actions, in frameworks, in processes, in communications, across team members and across divisions. Thinking about how we interact as coaches, what are the things that we do when we're participating in a coaching cycle, how we communicate our role using, let's say, a coaching menu, those kinds of things. Being consistent helps teachers better understand what your role is through the actions that you take, not just talking about it, but actually doing it. I like to say that the goal of a coaching experience is to be a little bit like Starbucks. You can go into any Starbucks and you get what you want, but every Starbucks is different, right? So it's customized. You get exactly what you want, but it's consistent. You get the same thing every time. It helps when you follow a framework or model. You can customize something, or you can, take one off the shelf so that you have a consistent structure to your coaching cycle and your coaching interactions. And when you think about being consistent, you can think about being consistent across the team, across divisions and departments, across the sections of the school, and consistent in your communication. One of the things that I have learned being a business owner is that when you're consistent, often you feel like you're getting bored by your own message. You're saying the same things over and over again. But the person on the other end, the person that you hope is listening, they have a million things coming at them. So it's really important for you to be so consistent that you're bored with what you're saying. It takes a long time for other people to really fully hear, internalize what you're talking about. So that level of consistency to the point where you're bored is actually a good thing. I think coaches are often really passionate learners. They want to do something different every time. They want to be better. And so there's always this like, well, I need to do something new. I need to do something different. And actually being consistent in your messaging will help you much more than doing something different every single time. Not to be boring, but just consistent. Consistency also allows you to collect data so you can measure the impact of your work. That's a huge thing that can be easy to forget about, but can be very important when we're talking about maintaining the position in schools and demonstrating the value of coaching. Having that data that this work leads to this impact on student learning, that's super, super valuable. And the more consistent you are, the easier it is to collect that data. I've got another case study for you from Carly. When she came into the coach and started working with me, she really wanted to have deeper reflective conversations with her coaching partners. And so really focusing in on specific questioning strategies so she could ask better questions in her coaching conversations to get those conversations to be more reflective, and also planning and structuring her coaching conversations so she was prepared, made her so much more confident. Those coaching conversations became much more focused and centered on teachers' learning goals for students, which is exactly what she wanted. That's what happens when you have consistency in your coaching program. Oops, sorry. Diane Sweeney, who's author of Student-Centered Coaching, on the podcast with me, talked about the importance of coaching being consistent, because teachers need to know there's a predictable structure to this work. We know that when working with teachers, they are so busy, their time is so valuable. We are essentially asking them to work with us. So we need to have that level of consistency so they know that their work with us will have a certain outcome. That's why consistency is so important. A lot of times in schools, we hire coaches for their personality, and then we forget the important part of actually adding consistency and structure to the work, because that person isn't going to stay with the school forever, and people gravitate towards different types of personalities. It's the consistency of the coaching process that is going to lead to consistent engagement in coaching in the school over time. One more section, and then we'll stop for questions. The third part that I'm going to talk about today is called community. And we're thinking about community in the sense of scaling our program to measure the impact we have, to connect teachers with each other, and to communicate the success of the program with all stakeholders so that we all feel part of the culture of coaching that we're building. In this phase, you want to think about taking all that data you collected in the last phase and measuring the impact of your work. This is also a great opportunity for coaches to recognize that they are informal leaders in their schools, and they have the capacity to be an informal leader through their advocacy for coaching, through the growth mindedness they model, through the change management they build in their school communities. It's an opportunity to start scaling what works. When we're doing that consistent practice, we have the opportunity to see what is working, do more of that thing, and less of the thing that is not working. This is when we have an opportunity to start connecting teachers to each other. When I was working full-time in schools, one of my favorite things was to get like kindergarten teachers and diploma teachers in the same room and see, are there ways that they can learn from each other? And the wonderful outcomes that come when we connect teachers to each other in unexpected ways builds that culture of belonging and community, because we start to know more people than in our immediate small circle. This is what grows a coaching community. Yeah, sorry, my slides. I've got a case study for you here, which is Tracy. When she started the coaching was brand new at her school. They have a really unique model, and her number one focus was to build a sense of community in the process. So she involved her coaching partners in every aspect of developing coaching at their team level. And she says that the team is so positive, feels a sense of belonging in terms of their work as educators with her as their coach. I watched that happen, so I can definitely verify that's the case. Those case studies that I gave you, I have so many more like that. When you're following the Thrive model, you really are setting the foundations for a thriving coaching culture. Quote before we have a break, which is from Anne-Marie Chow, who at the time was at United World College in Southeast Asia. And she talks about the big impact of coaching being the impact on professional learning. When you have whole school PD, whether it's done in-house or with an external consultant, you're going to get about 60 to 75% relevancy for teachers. But when you have a coach working with individuals or teams that has specifically identified a desire to get better at their practice, you get 100% relevancy for that team. So everything the coach puts in is going back to impact student learning. This is the perspective we need to think about when we think about hiring coaches. And that is the Thrive model. And I've got a link on there for you if you want to learn more about it. You can go there, and there's another workshop, a downloadable of this model and my description of it, and a program evaluation if you're already in a coaching program and you want to evaluate where you're at. And the next section, we're going to talk about what happens when you have leaned too heavily in any one of those. And we'll talk about all those gaps next. Now is my next stopping point. If you'd like to have a prompt, you could think about what works at your school, what you'd like to share, or a question. And I'll open up the chat and ask Mika to let me know if you saw any questions there.
Yes, we have one from Andy Kim. His question is, if coaching is personalized, then personal matters can be present in a coaching session. How do you manage these?
Oh my gosh, great question. Coaching sometimes can feel a little bit like counseling, and I think there is an importance to kind of defining what is coaching versus what needs to be addressed with someone else. We really can't, it's outside of our scope of practice to deal with personal matters. So just being clear about what those boundaries are, and even maybe asking a question, if this is happening to you right now in your coaching conversations, even asking a question like, this feels like it's something really personal for you. That's something that is a bit beyond what I can support with. How would you feel if we talk to so-and-so? Hopefully you have a counselor on staff that can address more personal issues like that. But yes, personal things come up a lot. And actually, trying to remember who said it in the last cohort, but one of the people in the last cohort of the coach talked about they weren't prepared for how much of the personal side, how much of the emotional side was going to be part of this. And educators, teaching is so close to our heart. Everything that happens is personal for us. Maybe not everything, but many things that happen are personal for us. So you do need to be a little bit prepared for dealing with that and knowing where the boundaries are.
Okay, Kim, we have one more from Sam. What happens when everyone that can benefit from coaching has been coached? How to sustain the role of a coach?
That's a great question. If you know me, you know that my blog is called Always Learning. I personally believe I'm never going to know everything there is to know. So if you have a belief that you stop learning at some point, coaching is going to be pretty hard to make successful, right? Like, I know everything. If you're that kind of person, coaching is going to be tough, right? So we are looking for building that growth-minded culture in our schools where there are spaces that people believe they always have something to learn. And we're looking to continually be better, because coaching is not about fixing a deficit or solving a problem. It's about fulfilling your potential to grow, your potential to excel. So it's not about we're getting everybody to the same point and now we're done. It's about each person has their own potential, exactly the way we think about students, and helping them maximize that potential. So that's a little bit of a mindset shift and could potentially be a culture shift in your school setting.
Thanks, Kim. That's all the questions we have for now.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to close that. Okay, so the last section of my session today, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions, is things to watch out for when you're working on building a coaching culture. And a bunch of questions have come up that have already kind of hinted at some of these, so I'm going to take them a little bit deeper in this section here. I talked about the gap in your coaching program. On the website that's on your screen right now, you can find a coaching program evaluation to identify where you might have a gap. The 3 gaps are a consistency gap, a community gap, and a vision gap. And we're going to talk about the impact of those. Either there's little to no impact in your school community, you have coaches, but nothing's really happening, or there's only one-to-one coaching happening and we're not really able to scale up to groups and teams, or there's individual teacher reluctance to coaching. We can't even really get it started. And someone asked a question about that earlier. That's what happens when we have a gap in that Venn diagram there. I'll start off with a quote from Jen Ricks, who was on the podcast last year. She's director of learning at the American Community School of Abu Dhabi. And she talked about the common view in education is that you must be bad if you need a coach. But when we think about elite athletes and high-level executives, for example, they have coaches, and that's the norm. That's what we should expect as educators. Everybody wants to excel. When we are in high-performing international schools that are hiring the best educators, like all of you in this room, you are people who want to be better. That's what coaches help you do. It's not about fixing a problem, it's helping you reach your goals. Schools, when they're starting to think about coaching, have kind of a choice to make at the beginning. And that choice is, what kind of coaching model do they want in their school setting? So we're going to start with that vision. We're going to start with that definition. We're going to start with that purpose of our coaching program. And that will help us define whether we want a coaching model that's like a Band-Aid. We are in an emergency situation. We need teacher support. We need coaches in here right now. We want it to be like a checklist type of program with lots of pre-made checklists, resources, just kind of like put a Band-Aid on it. or we want to go to something that's a little more customized, a little bit more personalized, a little bit more focused on developing the potential of each educator and bringing a coaching culture into our school that is about personal professional growth. What I talked about today is kind of in the middle of both of those things, right? Leaning towards uncovering the deepness under the iceberg and away from the Band-Aid model, but a little bit in the middle there. And I have examples of what I would put on either end, but I'm curious to hear if anyone has their own. We could talk about that at the end. One thing to remember as you're building a coaching culture, someone asked a question about this earlier, is that it really does take time. You're not going to hire a coach today and then suddenly you have a coaching program tomorrow. There's the complex work of defining what this program is going to do, who is going to do it, how it's going to work, how we're going to measure it, all of those pieces. And then there's the long process of consistency, launching and relaunching and sharing the purpose and success of coaching time and time again. It might get a little bit messy. You might realize, oh, we haven't really defined coaching. We're labeling everyone at the school as coaches, but actually some of those people have evaluative roles. Some of those people don't actually understand what coaching is. Nobody knows how to opt in because everybody's suddenly called a coach. Or the other way around, we hired coach because of a personality, but they don't really have any structure to their work. There's lots of different ways that it can get messy. So you need to be prepared to handle that. And being successful takes relaunching and commitment over time because people are busy. They're not paying attention to everything that you say, and being able to be consistent with what you share is really important. James DL, who at the time was at UWC and now is at NIST, talks about when building a coaching culture, leaders need to understand and recognize how long change takes in a school. It will take time to embed a coaching culture within the norms of the school. There's all sorts of structures you can build to create potential success for coaching, but you're also not going to do that in 1 year as well. When pieces are missing, in this case, when you have a clarity gap, something that could happen is the many hats problem. And the idea behind that is either the coach is tasked with so many different things, it is no longer clear what their role is. Maybe they're doing subcover and a million duties, and they're doing administrative tasks, and they're, just a million different things that aren't coaching. It's hard for teachers to see what is the value of this person, because maybe they're spending a lot of their time in an office, for example. And that leads to teacher reluctance, which is the next slide. But before I get there, I want to tell you there's also a many hats problem for leaders. Because if we don't define what coaching is, suddenly we can have people who are in leadership positions with the title of coach. And that's kind of a dangerous space to be, because we want coaching to be non-evaluative. And so while, of course, they can have coaching conversations, we have to be careful about who gets the title of coach. If there's a lack of clarity in your coaching program, ultimately what you'll end up with is teacher reluctance. And so the person who asked, what happens when no one wants to be coached? This is probably because a lack of clarity. So coming back to figuring out exactly what you want your coaching to be, the definition of coaching, the definition of the role of the coach, really clearly identifying those terms is a good place to start. When you have a clarity gap, it requires focus and nurturing. It might feel like you're going back to the beginning, but I promise you will get so much deeper results when everyone is really clear on the value and purpose and intention behind this program. In that sense, coaches need support too. Sometimes we hire coaches and we say, oh, well, they got hired. They know how to build a coaching program. They don't always know all of these pieces, right? That's why I run this course for coaches. That's why we're having this conversation right now. So thinking about ways that coaches can get support is really essential. And coaches can support leaders in the work that they need to do too, which I think is maybe later on in the slides. Let me see what's next here. So here's a lovely quote from Joel and Killian from that same podcast episode that I mentioned before. If coaches are doing non-coaching related work, before you know it, the resource of coaching is lost, yet the investment of coaching is still present without seeing the benefit. That is the key right there. That is why many coaching programs fail, because we have coaches in positions and they are expensive. They're just as expensive as another teacher. But if they're not coaching, there's no way the value of coaching can be implemented in that school. So we've got the cost, but we have no benefit. So this is a key mindset shift to consider when you're thinking, oh, if they don't have any teaching position, I can task them with this, I can task them with that. If it's not coaching, you're not going to see the value of it. When you have a consistency gap, That can be when you have multiple coaches and they're each kind of moving in a different direction. Coaches tend to be people who have a passion for education. They have an idea, they have a vision, they're outgoing, they want to do their thing. And if they're not all aligned, it can be really confusing about what is coaching, how does coaching work, what can I expect from coaching? What ends up happening is that coaching starts to feel scary or unclear to teachers, and they may not be willing to be vulnerable with a coach because each coach operates a little bit differently, especially if you have some coaches that think coaching is confidential and some that don't. So like foundational things like that are really essential. Starting with a needs assessment to really understand what your school community not only needs, but labels as their needs, the language that they use is really essential here so that you can start supporting teachers where they are at with their needs rather than what those individual enthusiastic coaches might be really interested in talking about. Not that they shouldn't be able to follow their passions, of course, but there's going to be a balance between, after school offerings and what happens maybe in school, for example. That requires a little bit of a mindset shift. Coaching isn't just about personality, it's about process. And what consistency can we put into this process so teachers know it's safe to opt in? Jim Laney, who at the time of interview, I think he was at the American School of Bombay, but now he's at Kaohsiung American School in Taiwan, talks about education typically being very flat. There may be 50 teachers supervised by one leader. It's not really a supportive environment for growing and learning, and coaching help fills that gap. It also has a secondary benefit of creating a step for strong teachers to take the next step towards leadership, which is something I talk about all the time, that coaches are informal leaders in their schools. And if you are a person who maybe isn't ready for formal leadership, administration, coaching is a great way to help you build your relational leadership skills, to understand how to navigate complex situations, how to navigate complex conversations, how to be able to move change in schools without having the formal responsibility of being a leader. The third potential challenge you might see, pitfall to avoid, is a community gap. And this happens when coaches get stuck just working one-to-one individually with teachers. That is where we all start. That is obviously what we want, but we need to move beyond that because let's say you're a school of 800 students and you have one coach, they can't work one-to-one with every single teacher forever. When you start to get the snowball rolling and people are starting to want to work with a coach, you have to learn how to scale. So it becomes difficult to scale if you have that community gap. It helps if you have really visible leadership buy-in. If you see leaders being coached, if you see and hear leaders talking about coaching with respect, with value, if you have specific structures and times in the day when coaching conversations can happen, you're embedding coaching into the culture and the formal structures of the school, that can help you scale your coaching community. An essential piece of all of this is that coaches get PD that's designed for coaches. Anyone who's a coach in the room right now knows that you are the one who's always delivering the PD. When is your chance to get PD about coaching? So that's really, when you've got that clarity and you've got that consistency, don't forget about having PD designed for coaches as well. James McDonald, who is now head of school, International School of Brussels, talked about the more we can individualize PD, which is exactly what coaching does, the more we can move forward as a school, which is what we want. Those are the different potential gaps that you may face in building your coaching program. Again, the link to access all of the resources about this program is on your screen right now. And I think it's in time for another question. Oh, I also want to tell you that if you enjoyed these stories, I have a podcast. Episodes come out every week. You can find all of the shows, previous shows, show notes, show resources, free workshops, all that stuff at coachbetter.tv, that website on your screen. And we're on all those social media platforms right there. I feel like this must be a time to stop. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Tell me your questions. What questions do we have?
Okay, we have one from Laura.
Okay.
She says, I've heard many schools are changing from evaluation to coaching. Just wondering if this is working well for schools that have taken on coaching. We don't have an official coaching program / culture at our school, but the primary admin has played with the idea by inviting teachers to sign up for the process last year with very little interest. As you mentioned that it shouldn't be taken up by admin as the coach. So how do you suggest the teachers go forth with this idea?
Excellent question. So I agree. I have heard the very same thing, that schools are, okay, let me see how I can say this without using too many words. Schools are thinking that it might be great to provide the support of a coach within the professional growth process. And so we're shifting towards, changing the name of appraisal to professional growth plan, or forget, I've heard so many PGP acronyms. That's the one that sticks in my mind. And so they're thinking, well, if we can do that in a professional growth plan, then why isn't that just coaching? And then at the end, the evaluation will come. From the clients that I have worked with where this is in place, it's not working well because it's very hard to be vulnerable when ultimately you're being evaluated. Why would you set a true actual goal in that context? You would set an artificial goal that you can achieve, right? So there's that piece already, is that's not really true coaching, because we're looking at the standards and we're just choosing the one we know we can meet, and we can have our regular conversations with our person and just tick the boxes. That's not what coaching is supposed to be. Secondly, an outcome of this process has been in schools where clients that I work with have this going on, is maybe they do set a true goal. And let's say it's, 1A in the standards, and it's the thing they want to hit, and it's the thing they're most excited about, and they work really hard and they meet their goal. But all along they have disregarded 3C or whatever, some other standard. And so they're doing a great job working towards their goal, but then they get to the end of the process and they fail on another standard that they weren't paying attention to, because the person is coaching them on their goal, but not keeping them informed about the standard that they missed. And then contracts aren't renewed. No one will ever opt into being coached again after an experience like that. I mean, that is like blindsided. And sure, I'm sure there's ways you can intentionally make sure that doesn't happen. But this comes into that many hats problem, where if you are a school leader and you are responsible for evaluating that person, it's very hard to truly be coaching. You can have coaching conversations, but to truly be a coach, that's very hard, because ultimately you're determining whether this person stays at the school or not. I'm not sure if that answers your question. Happy to continue talking about it.
Okay, in the meantime, we have 3 more, and another one from Laura, another Laura. Could you
Okay.
talk a little bit more about confidentiality in the context of coaching?
Yep. So generally speaking, everything that happens in a coaching conversation is confidential. So I have been in a situation personally where I have had school leaders ask me to tell them what my coaching partner said in a coaching conversation, and I have had to say, no, that is not easy. But coaching conversations are confidential. However, as a coach, you may see consistent themes across a grade level or a division or a subject area. And I think taking those confidential conversations and, using your ability to see connections between them, you can say, right now, there's challenges in grade 4 with this particular concept. I would like to provide more PD for grade 4. Can we have an extra slot? Or the grade 4 team has asked for blah, blah, blah. You don't want to single out any individual teacher. So that's kind of the essence of confidentiality. Does that make sense? I'm happy to clarify further.
Okay. Moving on from Mr. Bedford. If a school has a school-wide priority or goal of X, Y, or Z, and teachers have different focuses, how do you move the school towards that school-wide goal while respecting the individual teacher's aspirations?
Oh, excellent question. Thank you for that. So there's kind of 2 parts to this. And I think one part is that is a special, whether it's a natural skill or a skill that can be developed in coaches, is how to see the connection between school-wide goals, and individual teacher goals. That is something that you can develop as a coach, building that skill to like, how is this connected to the school-wide goal? Then there's also an element of just having that conversation with the teacher that, yes, we are going to work towards your personal goal here, but we know in addition to that, there are these school-wide goals. How can I help you move closer to those goals? So just being transparent. I didn't get too deep into coaching questioning or the coaching process in this session, but one of the key things that can be challenging for new coaches to recognize is that it's totally okay to be completely transparent about the questions you're asking and why you're asking them. And maybe you need an extra moment to think about what question you might want to ask. That is all totally fine. So you could be having a coaching conversation and the teacher wants to work on X goal and the school goal is Z goal, and you feel like they're completely separate. you could just say, like, I'm hearing you. I'm super excited to work with you about this. I'd just love to ask you a question about, do you see any connections between your goal and the school-wide goal? Help me understand how those two fit together. And if they don't, that's fine. We're still going to work on X, but let's also make some time to work on Z.
Okay, thanks, Kim. That's great. He had a follow-up question.
Okay.
How can a coach deal with teachers that may have a negative personal issue with you?
Yeah. There is no getting around this. I mean, the reality is not everybody likes everybody. I know it's hard. We don't like to think that in education, but it's just the truth. And so that is helpful if you have multiple coaches in a school. People are going to gravitate towards the one they get along with personality-wise. And if someone really genuinely doesn't like you and you really do want to do something about it, you can, practice your informal leadership skills and have a conversation with them. And I know that's not easy. On the podcast this year, I'm featuring coaching calls with my clients who have allowed those calls to be shared publicly because we know that they're confidential, but they have agreed before the conversation was recorded. And one of them does include an issue where this new coach has a teacher that doesn't really like her and she's not really sure how to handle it. And we just talked about one of the first prompts I asked was, if you didn't like someone, what is one thing they could do to make you, kind of reconsider a little bit? And she said, well, if they just would say hi to me in the hallways. And I said, well, could you say hi to this person? And she said, yes. So like just starting to think about small ways to begin to approach that person, and then maybe having a private conversation where you say, I know we got off on the wrong foot. Please help me understand, what can we do to work more successfully together? Something like that. I mean, it's not fun. Nobody wants to have those conversations. I have another podcast episode with Jennifer Abrams that talks about that, and a couple of blog posts and short, quick tips about difficult conversations that might be helpful for you. And they're all on the website on your screen there at Coach Better TV.
Great answer, Kim. I know that can be difficult. We have one
Yes.
last question in the chat from Zhang Bo. So as the member of the leadership team and also who will run the coaching conversation is the reality here. I think, oh, sorry, it's not a question. I think it's a comment, but I
Okay,
guess
that's okay.
I think we do have the foundations here at our school that the program is clear and not the evaluation you call is PGP. I am trying to help the teachers to get the true goal. Is there any good question tools you would recommend?
If you're talking about having as a leadership team, individual leaders working with teachers, helping them get to their true goal, like when I was talking before about they're going to come up with an artificial goal just to like go through the process, and you feel that you have really implemented that clarity phase, and it is really clear that this is not related to evaluation, which, I just wouldn't want to prompt you to continue to think about that. I think you could start by asking questions about when they imagine their classroom in the ideal state, what would it look like, sound like, feel like? That's a question from Steve Barkley. So this idea of envisioning the future of what your classroom could look like, and then digging into the response there, because sometimes it's a bit harder to, I don't want to use the word fake, it's the only word that's coming to mind right now, but to fake a goal when you're envisioning what you want for the future, right? Like, what would be different about your classroom? What might you see, what might hear, what might students be saying, what might they be doing? That kind of question can start prompting a conversation like that. If you really feel like they are continuing to give you goals that they are clearly already proficient at, and you really feel like it is not a true goal, you could also just say, like, you're clearly very proficient about this. What is the aspect about this that you really want to grow into? I mean, that's a legitimate thing to ask. I do have the chat open. I see another question. What are some of the best ways to create teacher buy-in? That's what you see, Mika.
Yes.
Micah. Best ways to create teacher buy-in. Number one, clarity. Finding clarity around the role, being very clear that this is non-evaluative, that it is confidential, that it is assets-based and not a deficit model. We're not trying to fix people. We're not trying to make mini-me's. We're not trying to make robots. This is something about your professional growth. Number one. Second thing, another case study piece that is not in this session, but I will share with you. I was working with a math coach who was doing amazing things with individual teachers, but she was still like super frustrated by the reluctance of other teachers to buy in. And what she didn't realize is that she wasn't really clearly communicating her role in a standardized enough way that they could see where to opt in. You know, if you don't know what you don't know, it's hard to opt into something. And so in the program with me, she worked on creating a coaching menu, and that just shifted the conversation completely. She had this third thing that she could show to teachers, and they were like, oh, I want that thing. And that can be a really easy way to build buy-in. Obviously, I'll give you a couple more. A third option is to really have the teachers who are working with a coach talk about the benefits to student learning in their classroom, talk about the value that they got out of being coached by the coach, by you maybe in this case. When teachers can see other teachers having success, that is a huge draw. And if you really want to be strategic about it, you could think really carefully about which are the teachers you invite into coaching cycles with you. Can you choose teachers who have a strong sway or pull in their immediate department, division, grade level, whatever it is? All of these things are like very strategic and intentional moves that you can make as a coach to build buy-in for your role. And this is the kind of stuff that I'm going to do a brief mention of my course again. This is the kind of stuff we really dig into in the coach, because you are going to try a lot of things, and we need to figure out which ones work in your school community. So I just gave you a list. Please go try them all, but you might find that none of those things work for you. And so what's the next thing? And that's where having PD for coaches, that's designed for coaches, working with someone who knows exactly the environment that you're in, that's why that's so valuable. That's why I mentioned that earlier in the session.
And we have a follow-up question to Heather's.
Yes.
How would alliances and agreements help with buy-in?
Do you mean like agreements for what coaching is? I mean, I think that's what you mean. And I would say that's super helpful, right? This idea that essential agreements for coaching, that, and you can go to that definition that I gave you at the very beginning of the slideshow, that it's non-evaluative, that it's confidential, that it's tied to classroom goals, all those things. And if we agree that that's what coaching is, that's going to be a lot less frightening for teachers to enter into. It's a safe space to be vulnerable. But the bigger picture of the school needs to be that growth-mindedness, that risk-taking, that willingness to engage, the alignment, the clarity, all of those pieces. I'm conscious that we're at an hour, and I do want to briefly tell you that I offer a program called The Coach that is designed for coaches, and registration opens for this program on September 14th. So if any of this conversation today was valuable for you, this program digs deep into all of these. And that's the registration dates for you. And if you want to get kind of like a peek at what we think about and what we do, I'm running a free challenge next week. I've got the website on the screen right there. It's a 5-day challenge. You'll get 5 emails, 1 email each day, and each one will have a nice resource in there. Probably some of the ones that I mentioned today, actually, to help you kind of think about your coaching program, your coaching practice. And it also has an opportunity to connect with other coaches. If you want to respond to the prompt, you can do so on social media. So that's a great way to just kind of get a peek, to learn more from today's session, because there will be a lot in that challenge week, a lot of resources that will be valuable for you and prompts for you to think about. So those were our 3 sections that we talked about today, and we can still keep talking. I just wanted to make sure I mentioned those 2 things. If you had an aha moment today, or if you had something you want to take action on when you go back to school, I would love to hear about that. Feel free to like raise your hand and grab the camera. I'd love to like see your face and say hello. So just kind of wrap up this conversation. That is basically the end of what I wanted to talk about today, and I'm happy to keep chatting with anyone who'd like to stay here with us.
Hi.
Hi.
Guys. To say something that is I'm going to starting my coaching conversations next week with teachers, and I really like that clarity part. I think throughout the conversation, I would like to sit down with the teachers to using different questionnaires to really help them to get a clear, smart, true goal for them, and also I would like to throw the bar to them to what you think. To help you reach the goal, what do you think my role could be? So
yes,
Yes, so we co-construction how the process could work, and then that truly beneficial for them. I guess that's what
Absolutely. Yes, I think any time that you can make this a real partnership with your coaching colleague, with your coaching partner, that is going to help bring the buy-in so much stronger, right? Because one question I always love to ask is like, what kind of support do you need from me? How would you like to work together? What would be most valuable for you? Any of those kinds of questions are a great way to help them own the process.
I have a question for you and
Yes.
anyone else who wants to answer. I'm just curious as far as you talked about schools building in the time for these conversations. What does that time look like? Are we talking about teacher prep periods? Are we talking about like morning collaboration time? I'm just curious what other schools are doing for that.
I would be super happy to open up to the floor if anyone wants to share. I'll give you my first thoughts, and then anyone else who wants to share, please go right ahead. I think one of the key things is not every school, even right now, has collaborative planning time for a department or a grade level. So that's like your first piece, is like, we know we all have collaborative planning time at the same time. So if you're trying to build in structures for coaching to be part of the school day, having intentional collaborative planning time that is not before or after school is a huge step forward. And then there's also the piece of when you have professional growth time, whatever that might look like, whether it's a PD day or an afternoon, whatever it might be, really making time for coaching conversations during that time as well. I'm doing another session for AAIE in a couple of weeks, and I'm doing it with a principal who's I've been working with their school. And the one big aha moment she said to me when we were planning the presentation last week was, you know what, Kim, when I look back on our work together, it was the fact that we stopped, took time to actually reflect on what's working, what our areas of strength are, how we can grow together as a team. That's what like shifted the movement forward. And so it's up to essentially the leaders to carve out that time for teachers and teams. And I will welcome anybody else to jump in if anybody else wants to share like how it works at their school, how it worked at a previous school. Please hop in.
Kim, as far as the time is concerned, as a principal, you can teach lessons, ask teachers to book your time so you can teach lessons to make time free for principals and coaches.
Yes. Absolutely. Subcover. I mean, how valuable is that's like gold in schools, right? Like you want to work with a coach and there's absolutely no time to get together. I will come in and do that lesson for you. Any other questions, thoughts, aha moments, contributions you'd like to share to the conversation now?
Can you put the slide back up with the dates of the coaching
I sure
certificate
can.
program, please?
Yep. Of course, that doesn't have the link on it. Sorry about that.
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi, Kim. Thank you.
Hi.
I joined an hour late, so I had
It's okay.
the time wrong. I'm so
It's
sorry.
okay.
So I missed the main chunk of information. I'm currently in a role of head of school, and we have curriculum coordinators who I would love to move from managing curriculum to instructional coaching.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, so I kind of have a two-pronged question because I think there might be coaches on the call. I would love to know, like, as a head of school, what do coaches need me to do besides going into their classrooms? Brian, I love that. Like, done. We'll do that Monday. And then how do I help my curriculum coordinators know like to move toward the instructional coaching? So those are my two questions.
Okay, so what they need you to do, I think it sounds like you're already starting to do it, right? You're listening to what they need and you're providing the support that they need. I think taking the time to, and I'm not going to try to repeat this whole presentation just in like 2 minutes to tell you, but like taking the time to really clarify what you want out of what is a coach in your school. Like, what is the difference between a curriculum coordinator and a coach? What is it that defines this change in this role? And then maybe even asking them, what do they need to be successful in that space, right? Because for them, it's a whole shift in their position. They have been maybe managing a lot of documentation, facilitating a lot of conversations around curriculum. Some of that might still happen in their coaching role, but you want want them, it sounds like you want them to have more coaching conversations, be more involved in classroom practice, help teachers grow professionally, all those pieces. Well, what does that mean? We can't assume that everybody in the conversation really understands. So I think the first piece is really to define that really clearly. I've already forgotten your second question. What was your second question?
Well, I think you hit both of them. What they
Okay.
need is for me to define, and where, so that's how I can get them, asking them what they need to know that they need to move into the more of a coaching role rather than a curriculum. And then just, yeah, what I need. And what was my other question?
That's right. That is what you asked. You asked what you need to do and how can I help them, I think. And I think
Yeah.
you actually just hit on another thing too, which is like, I wonder if there's a conversation in there that is something like, this is what we want to see in our practitioners, in our classrooms. How do you think we can help them get there? I mean, I don't know where these people are in the conversation. Like, I don't know exactly what part of the process we're talking about here, but it could be really interesting to have an open conversation about what do we want to see happening in our classrooms? How can we help them get there? What kind of support do we need to provide? And maybe they are actually starting to come up with the definition of what coaching might look like at your school, because they're thinking about what is actually happening in our school right now and how we can support teachers better. And this comes back to something I said earlier about the value of having coaches being on staff at your school. They know the people, they know the place, they know the community, they know what's happened in the past, they know potential for the future. You're in a very fortunate position that you have these people that are already part of your community. They have a really good understanding of what's going on at your school. And so when you start to think about that next evolution of those positions, they probably know quite a lot of what you already want. And maybe you can have almost a coaching conversation with them to kind of solicit that from them.
Yeah.
And they need coaching PD. Don't forget about that.
Yeah, I'm interested for them. But what are like the dates and times?
So it's all asynchronous, but we have global cohort meetings based on people's time zones. So right now we've got people all over the world. So there'll be multiple cohort meetings. Usually for Asia, the cohort meetings happen every 2 weeks. And usually for Asia, it's around 4 p.m. 4 p.m. Bangkok time. Sorry, I have no idea where you are. Afternoon.
Cambodia.
Okay, so
Next
perfect.
door.
So we're right. Yeah, we're right in the same time zone. But usually that's when they happen. And they're every 2 weeks real time. And then there's all asynchronous communication in the course with your mentor, in the course, in our course community, via a private feedback spreadsheet. And all of the course content is delivered asynchronously. So as soon as you enroll, you get access to everything. And you can discuss with your mentor through office hours that are bookable by Calendly at your convenience with you and your mentor. You can discuss if you want to adjust the order, but I've been doing it for 8 years now. It's pretty dang good. You don't need to adjust the order. Like it's good.
Kim, can I just hop in here for a second?
Yes.
We have some people who are staying and some people who are leaving. And before anybody else goes, I just want to say thank you very much for a really exciting presentation. What you're talking about, of course, is really a cultural shift in schools that's been too long coming, and it makes such a huge difference in what it's like for kids and what it's like for teachers to have this sort of trusting relationship built in. And I thought your example of, the tennis pros right now at the US Open, each one of them has a coach. There's nothing derogatory about having a coach. So
yes,
I just want to thank you very much. It's been really informative, and obviously it's such a powerful topic, and there's so much depth needed that what you're offering online right now, I hope people will follow up and join your year-long program. But we do hope to see you again in webinars and, of course, at our conferences and weekend workshops, perhaps, that some schools will sponsor. Where your work's really is really important, and I thank you for it.
Thank you so
And
much.
for those of you who have joined us, I want to thank you for doing that today. And we're going to leave the Zoom link. We're going to leave it open for another 20 minutes or so. So if you just want to stay behind and talk with Kim, please do. And Micah, wherever you are, thank you for coordinating so much for this today. Thank you. But anyhow, have a great rest of the weekend. And Kim, thank you so much. And please don't leave. I just want to make sure that you just know that we're just happy to leave the link open for more conversations to take place. Thanks so much, Kim.
Thank
Have a
you.
good
Thank you,
weekend.
Earcos. Thank you so much.
Be
Thank
in
you both.
touch.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
My pleasure to hang out and answer any other questions or just have a conversation. I'll hang out for a few minutes and let me know what you're thinking.
Kim, I guess just coming back to the role of the coordinator, so in most of our schools, we have the PYP, the MYP, the DP
Yep.
coordinator. So having this person on a reduced load, do you think that would be a good person to have in this role or not? Like, what do you think?
I have many, but I have someone right now that I'm thinking of. As soon as you said this, the word coordinator, I was like, oh, thinking of this person. So that person usually is a great person to like kind of start the conversation around coaching. But what she is coming up against, which we know from this conversation, is the coordinator role is a big enough job on its own. So like adding a whole nother full-time position on top of that is really challenging. But we all have budgets. There's not unlimited money. So if you are thinking about trying to merge those two, that's a very commonly merged position. It's not easy, and the person should, really be able to have some boundaries between the work that they're doing as a coordinator versus the work that they're doing as a coach. This is not the person I was thinking of a second ago, but another client I have from a previous cohort, she is a PYP coordinator, the librarian, and she's trying to build in coaching. And she is also featured on the podcast. She's in one of my coaching calls. And her challenge is, how do I manage the balance between the compliance responsibility of a PYP coordinator? Because part of that job is ultimately compliance to the PYP program, and coaching, which is really not compliance driven at all. And so she's looking for where and how can I find that balance, and how can I carve out the different aspects of these roles. And I think that is probably the biggest challenge. I think the person in that position is probably a great person to be a coach, but managing all of those things can be really challenging. Doesn't mean it's impossible. Doesn't mean you shouldn't start there, but it's just a lot.
Thanks, Kim.
Yep. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, hi. So
Hi.
I'm curious about your like your coaching and mentorship program, and I've actually done the Harvard Graduate School certification, but I'm also curious, do you consult in schools and like come in and help get that coaching program off the ground, or you solely use this program?
I do both.
Okay.
My time is just getting really limited. So that's the only conflict. And I was actually having a conversation with my business coach the other day, like, okay, I need to figure out how to manage. There's only 24 hours in the day. There's only so many hours I can be doing things. So yes, I do both. I work with schools independently to help them build coaching programs. And I also offer this group coaching program. And I also do, and I have no idea how big your school is, but I also do custom cohorts of this program. So I've had schools where like they have 9 or 10 coaches and we do a cohort on their timeline. So there's lots of opportunities. I have my website somewhere on here. Let's see. Yes, right there. The very first button on that page is to book a discovery call with me, and we can just talk about what the options are. I could talk about it right now, but I don't know if everybody wants to hear that.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it. I just wanted to clarify, like, because I'm at IS Manila, and we don't have a coaching program, but a number of us have taken various types of coaching certification. And so I think we're moving in that direction, but it's a really big school. And I just wonder, sometimes it's helpful to have someone come in and say, okay, let's see what's already being done and then help move that forward. So I was just really curious if that's part of something you offer. So I'll be getting in touch.
Awesome. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. My pleasure. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Kim, we have a question in the chat
Sure.
box. Should I go ahead and read it, or?
I can see it's Andy, right? No, it's not Andy. Is there value in blending the idea of distributive leadership with a coaching model by asking people like heads and hearts? Excellent question. So this is something that I'm seeing super common right now, is kind of transitioning heads of departments to a coaching role. And I think there's a couple of thoughts that I would like to share with you. Even though heads of department aren't really in a like, you get a contract or you don't get a contract kind of position, I would still be careful of transitioning the title to coach. So I think you really want, if you have a person who is in a coaching position, you want to be really careful of who you title as coach. The person who's in a coaching role ideally should be someone who's a peer. And the head of department ultimately is not a peer. They're privy to other conversations. They have other responsibilities, right? So certainly training your heads of department to have coaching conversations, to know when and how to communicate that they want to have a coaching conversation, that's huge. Also work that I do with schools, but calling them coaches, I think, is a practice that does make me a little cautious. So I would just consider how you label that. Does not mean they can't have coaching conversations, does not mean heads of departments can't be trained to have coaching conversations, but the title of the role would be something I would offer as something for you to think about. Happy to talk more about that or answer another question. And I see that people are DMing me in this chat, and I'm really sorry if I missed it. It's hard for me to catch all of these while I'm talking. But if anybody wants to get in touch with me, my website is on the screen right now. Also my Twitter handle, if that's useful for anyone. Please send me an email, send me a direct message, click the book a discovery call, talk about this for your school anytime. And I'm trying to go back to everybody who asked for my email address. Actually, I'm just going to put my email address in the chat. That's way easier. Hang on, everyone in meeting.
I don't think, there you go. Yes.
Yeah.
It's been sent.
Good. Any other questions before everyone goes about their Saturday?
Oh.
Okay. It was my pleasure. Like, you guys asked spot on, amazing questions, every single one prompting me further into the presentation. So I really appreciate the active engagement in this session today. It's just so exciting that so many schools in the region are starting to think about this in ways that I think are truly going to enhance teacher retention, satisfaction, fulfillment, that also leads to improved student learning. And I'm just super excited to be part of that conversation. I thank all of you so much for being part of this morning conversation with me today. And thank you so much to EarCoast for hosting, and Micah for helping me navigate all those, and Ed for the wonderful thank you and introduction. So thank you guys so much.
Okay. Well, thanks to Kim. I'll see you in October.
Yes.
Thank you for your time this morning, and have a pleasant Saturday and weekend ahead.
Yes. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Stop recording.